We take a single episode of a science fiction TV series and overanalyze it to within an inch of its life. This is the Fusion Patrol Podcast. Welcome to the discussion. Hello and welcome to another episode of Fusion Patrol. I'm Eugene.
And I'm Simon.
And tonight we're going to be looking at The Prisoner episode, Living in Harmony. In the Old West, a sheriff resigns, and he is later captured by ruffians and dropped off in the town of Harmony. The town is run by the judge, who wants him to be the town's new sheriff. He refuses, and is later attacked by the townsfolk, who are insulted by his refusal. He is placed in protective custody by the judge, and another prisoner, Johnson, is given to the crowd in his place. They lynch him, despite the pleas of his sister, Kathy, who runs the saloon. The sheriff is guarded by the Kid, a crazed, mute psychopath killer with amorous designs on Kathy. Later that night, Kathy distracts the Kid and gives the sheriff the jail keys. He rides out of town only to be recaptured at the pass. The sheriff isn't arrested for this. Kathy is, for aiding a prisoner to escape. "When you work for me, she goes free," says the judge, but still he refuses. Then the judge orders the Kid to guard Kathy. The threat is obvious, and the sheriff accepts the badge, but not the guns. The judge demonstrates that the town isn't safe without guns by having people try to beat up the sheriff. Later, the Kid kills a man for giving Kathy attention. Some of the townsfolk want the sheriff to deal with the judge, but they themselves are afraid. Their spokesman is killed by the judge. That night, the sheriff arranges to escape with Kathy, but the judge lets the Kid know she's been seeing the sheriff. The Kid kills her in a fit of jealousy. The next day, the sheriff picks up the guns, but he puts down the badge. He kills the Kid in a fair gunfight, and he gets in a running battle with the judge's henchmen. He defeats them, only to have the judge kill him. Number 6 awakes on the floor of the saloon, a cardboard cutout of the judge in front of him. Outside, more cardboard cutouts, including the dead Kid and a horse. He hears the village music, and exiting through a gate, he is back in the village square. He confronts number 2, who turns out to be the judge, and his associates number 8, the Kid, and number 22, Kathy. He wordlessly leaves. Number 8 complains that number 2 got too caught up in the fantasy and forced the scenario too soon, before number 6 broke. Number 2 argues how could he not get caught up in the adventure. Number 22 cries for what she has done, and later goes to the saloon to think about it. Number 8, now mad like the Kid, strangles her and kills himself in front of number 6 and number 2. Number 6 is still a prisoner. So, when you started watching this episode, did you notice anything different about it?
I did spot something, yes.
It's a very different episode of The Prisoner. I think we're used to saying that at this point, but I think this one might be more different.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. It was different to the point of not even appearing to be the prisoner. Not just, as your synopsis makes clear, you're talking about the sheriff, not about number 6 right until up at the end. But also, you don't get any visual indication that this is the prisoner, other than the fact that, you have McGowan in the starring role. No on-screen titles, none of the kind of normal sequence that we get. None of the credits or anything. The only thing that we get is some kind of slight parallel to the story that's told through the usual opening sequence of the prisoner being captured and
captured, yeah.
Resigning and being taken to a new place against his will. So you do get that kind of that micro story, but it's retold for this setting and told without the theme tune, without the titles, without any of the usual paraphernalia that pops up on screen at the beginning to say, "Hey, this is a Prisoner episode."
So in that respect, I'd say a bold move.
I think it's an enormously confident move because you're doing this thing of shifting the story to a completely different context, to the point where, although obviously your lead characters are your lead characters, they're not your lead characters in the normal way. I mean, the kind of thing that springs to mind with that are things like, for example, Inferno in Doctor Who, where you have a parallel universe, and that gives you an opportunity for all of your regular cast to play different versions of themselves. The X-Files did it in the episode Triangle. But these are the kind of episodes that shows do, a few seasons in, once they've got the kind of hang of it, once they've got the swing of it, they know the audience is with them, they know what they're doing, and they're looking to shake things up a bit. And to have the confidence to do this in the Prisoner's opening and indeed only series is quite impressive, I think.
Yeah, and it's an enjoyable episode. I mean, you can't really divorce this episode from some of the stuff that was going on behind it. And one of the things that going on behind the scenes is that McGowan was a big fan of Westerns. So he wanted to do one. But I think that it is doing a very nice job of giving us that parallel. The town is very much the village. The judge is very much number two. Perhaps maybe the psychopathic character of the kid is more of an Old West trope, sort of. I can't think of any quite so crazy characters in any Westerns that I've ever seen. And he does a startlingly good job of being nuts, I think.
It's an interesting performance.
I particularly like him in his hat when he's like, with my head on, because he's got that little top hat, I guess it is, which is not traditional Western wear, to my recollection. So it's an unusual choice of him being in his long johns and with a hat for his character. But
certainly conveys the kind of madness, the nuttiness.
Yeah.
Slightly
now that character
Avengers-esque as well, I thought.
Yeah, I think that's a safe comparison. But then it's very hard to now, as in present day, I think it's probably easier for example, one country to tap into the genre of another. Back in the 1960s, I'm not sure how many Westerns had been done in Great Britain. And so, I'm not criticizing that. I think they did a very good job. Perhaps more
the gunfighters in Doctor Who.
Yeah, perhaps more authentic than they realize, because the trope even here, the perception of the Old West is Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Southern California, but in reality the Old West was really more Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma. These are states that are further north and further east than where I am, but what you see in the Westerns is shot in Southern California, so the more of the southwestern feel to what this was. So actually it was greener and hillier and a more hospitable place to live. So when he's out riding across Bedfordshire, which is where all those external shots were shot.
It looked a bit like he was on the South Downs to me, but that certainly didn't look what I associate the Old West with.
Dunstable Downs.
Okay, it looks almost exactly like a path that runs up near Ditchling Beacon, where you have that chalk path coming up, and I almost suppose for an instant that it had been filmed there. But certainly, that feeling of being a little bit more English home counties than American West.
The American West, that's right. But the American West, places like Phoenix and Tucson and are very inhospitable places, and really only grew up after more towards the beginning of the 20th century. I mean, there were towns there. There's a river that runs through Phoenix, believe that one or not. It's long dammed up, but you don't put towns in what you see a lot in the West, where it's just a little town on a flat, empty plain. You don't do that because people will just die. But if you move up a little further north, it's great grazing land for cattle and lots of plains and grassy plains, and it's really more where the big Old West the famous Dodge City and all those things. Those were not southwestern towns. Those were what we now call midwestern towns. Back then, it was, way out west. But so, I look at that and I go, yeah, actually they probably did best they could, but actually that they did probably better than they thought. Really the only thing that rang hideously untrue was the old Mexican.
Yes.
That was a bit of a caricature. Let's put it that way. But, the town was good. I thought they did a very good job, but nonetheless, to the point that was made, the writers are not, steeped in that. They're steeped in watching it, perhaps, but not necessarily steeped in the culture of producing those things. So, there are some things to it that feel English, even though it's not. Do you know, I watched the whole thing and didn't realize that the judge had an American accent. Just didn't. Or Kathy, or that the prisoner was attempting to do an American accent.
Surely he wasn't.
Apparently, he may have been.
Really?
A little bit.
I didn't spot that. I got that everyone else was trying to do American accents. I didn't get that McGowan was supposed to be doing American. He sounded very English to my ears.
Well, actually, the judge is an American, so.
Is he?
He's one of those actors that moved to Britain and would get American parts.
So he was putting on the English accent then?
Or he'd adopted one a little bit from his time in England, but he was originally, as was, I guess, the kid, but then that didn't help his accent much. I think he's French Canadian, and I'm not sure about the woman playing Kathy, but just didn't even faze me till after I was reading about it afterwards. I didn't realize it. I've reached the point now where the accents I don't really hear them unless they're very thick. And that's just the confluence of TV that we watch in this day and age, I think, which back then might have been a little more pronounced. But
well, certainly the fake American accents, or fake or otherwise American accents, neither way is going to bother me. Very much like I can enjoy certain Big Finish Doctor Who adventures that I don't think you can, because I don't hear all of.
Are we talking about that one with the Orson Welles thing again?
Oh, I wasn't thinking. I was Invaders from Mars. No, I wasn't particularly thinking of that one, but yes,
that one. Yeah, okay, yeah, that one as the only one I can recall that bothered me, but that I heard anyway. So it's the bad thing about this story to me is that it's not covering any new ground. It is a retelling of the whole prisoner saga. Kind of. I want you to take the badge. Is the badge the metaphor for number 6? I adopt the mantle of number 6, and the gun's the metaphor of accepting the village, or
well, I don't know. Is it as metaphorical as that, or is it more of a play on a question of violence?
This show did. This show was actually held back, apparently, and not shown, at least in some places in the United States, because the anti-gun message was not very popular when it originally aired. So,
but obviously, the prisoner is in the kind of normal setting for the prisoner is allegorical in a number of ways that we've discussed. It's not uncommon for Westerns to be allegorical as well.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, what was interesting about this story wasn't, I agree with you, it wasn't particularly trying to do anything new in terms of exploring new ground. What it did do very well, I felt, was to give you a shift of perspective on some of the things that we'd looked at before and see whether the interpretations were still going to hold true. So, for example, the whole question of, making him take the badge and all of this, I interpreted that, and I think this is probably a theme through a number of Westerns, to be not just about identity that we've talked about quite a lot before. It's individuality, sure, but it's focused more on his autonomy. And again, the themes are there in The Prisoner, things to do with conforming or whatever. But he won't take the badge because he wants to retain his autonomy. He wants to be his own man, go where he wants to, behave in the way that he sees right, which is why even when he does take the badge, he doesn't take the guns. So, and you know, to have his own values. So it's tied up with identity, sure, but I think when I go back and look at some of the other episodes of The Prisoner, it might actually make me view them a little bit differently because I'll be thinking about it from a slightly different perspective.
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, one thought that crosses my mind is that if you'd been watching The Prisoner and perhaps you had been watching it in a more literalist fashion, and I think that there is some issue with that. In other words, I think there are some people who were not enamored of The Prisoner when it aired because they were watching it in a very literal sense and going, well, this is kind of silly or nonsensical or however you want to put it, and not seeing that it was meant to be a lesson on or a statement on modern society. And I know that seems kind of hard at this point in time because, of course, you can't really come to The Prisoner without already knowing that The Prisoner is steeped in these layers, I think. So you're watching that and perhaps you're not getting it. And then they plunk one down that says, okay, here it is in the Old West. And if you see the parallel of the themes from what you've been watching to what is a more classical storytelling trope, is it a mechanism by which you're trying to convince the audience, you see, we've been telling you something, perhaps you should think about it. It's here. The theme is, it does apply in other places. And they could have done this in any, excuse me, and they could have done this in any genre, I think. It would have taken a little work, but West is probably the easiest because of the isolation of towns. Yeah.
Yes.
It might be hard to put that in the middle of New York City or Chicago and do a gangster story or something, but they certainly could have taken some of those themes and ran them through any kind of genre of story. But then to the idea of the badge being the mantle of responsibility or conformity or not doing what you want, though, there is one big difference I see there between that and Life in the Village. It seems like Life in the Village, they want him to conform and become a villager. But Sherif is actually, I'm sure it's not intended, but he's like the gold star. I mean, he's a very special person in the community. And so it's not joining the masses and joining the rabble here. It is accepting a position of responsibility. So this is more like what they mentioned in other episodes where they'd hoped that when he ultimately cracks that he can then become something more within the village.
Yes. As in Free for All, being elected to the position of number 2 and a number of other references to that. So I think that in itself is not new either.
So we're kind of just condensing all of what we've learned in The Prisoner down into one Western.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm wondering about is, so Westerns as a genre aren't actually about being set in the Old West, right? I mean, you can take...
They aren't now.
Well, no, but I mean, even then, you can stretch the bounds of what is a Western. You can take High Noon and you can set it in space, for example.
Yes.
And, in some sense, it's still a Western because it's still the same themes and it's still the same way of telling a story, right?
I think so, yeah.
So in that sense, in the sense of conforming to those particular norms of the genre, is The Prisoner, as in all the rest of the show, is The Prisoner actually a Western?
No, it's science fiction. It's just a Western set in a strange science fiction-y village. I think... I
have a much clearer idea of what a Western is than what science fiction is. Because I'm not sure it is, but I do this. I look at this and I think actually there are more elements of it than I originally noticed, than I originally realised.
Well, I think if you take a look at science fiction films and TV shows, not so much literature, but a criticism that has in the past been leveled at science fiction television and movies is that it's pretty formulaic, safe. Take a Western and transplant it into space. I mean, that's both a fair observation and it's also a criticism because a lot of old Westerns were nothing more than adventure melodramas. They're not deeper stories like, say, High Noon. There's a lot of just the Indians are attacking, we've got to defend the fort, shoot a bunch of people, and science fiction. As you say, there are some things that you can do when you're in small isolation, little towns, forts, frontier places that you cannot do in New York City or London. And the human themes may be the same, love and jealousy and hatred and envy and all those things may be universal themes across the board, but you do have a unique set of problems in a frontier. And in space, you've got the biggest frontier ever, the one that never ends. And the Western genre has basically run that out. I mean, the frontier is gone. We've settled across the West. It's not there. So that anytime anyone ever wants to tell one of those stories, they must either go back to a period drama, go to perhaps some remote place in Africa where you might be able to still do it. Although they've got cell phones everywhere you go there. So, or you have to go into deep space. And so, I think that match between some certain types of science fiction and some certain types of Westerns is a good one. So in this case, I do actually think that they've kind of got, The Prisoner has kind of got that. I mean, it is to some degree a science fiction story because what they do isn't really possible, like what we've seen in this episode. Drug him up, put microphones on him, and make him hallucinate that maybe someday, but then that's but I think it's a good match. So they've tied those two genres together. I think they've spotted the parallel between the two and used it well in this case. Or it's a fluff episode. Either way.
Well,
it's like Pat wants to do a Western. Okay.
I mean, I think the actual science fiction element in this is what I feel is the weakest aspect of the episode. And in fact, the whole ending, I feel, is quite weak. I felt it was a very confident step to take to transpose the whole show into a Western and to basically retell it without any reference to the village or any of the things that we're familiar with from, week to week watching of the show. Mm-hmm. But it seemed to me a failure of confidence at the end of that to kind of have this pretext for doing all that, which was basically told through an info dump. The headphones, this is what we've been doing, number 2 chatting to his sidekick, mm-hmm. A little bit of dialogue back and forth to say, this is what we've been doing.
Well, but here's the thing though. How could they have ended it if they hadn't? I mean, if they just made a Western from end to end, they would have had to end it. And that's something we haven't been given for his life in the village. So yes. It's kind of tricky there.
I think it is a difficult question of how to end it, and I don't think it's an easy one to answer. But the ending that they tacked on, and in particular the let's have some sort of closure to the kind of Western story by having them slightly inexplicably or implausibly slip back into their previous characters and then all die in classical Greek tragedy kind of way. That just didn't wash. It didn't serve the Western story, and it didn't really work in the context of the village either. So it felt like they were admitting they didn't know how to end the Western story.
So maybe go ahead.
I mean, yeah, it's okay, fair enough. But if they'd ended it with number 2 shooting the prisoner, or rather the judge shooting the sheriff, and that had been the ending, I would have been just as happy. I mean, I would probably have still felt that wasn't a totally satisfactory ending, but it wouldn't have been any worse than what we got. Well,
it might have been foreshadowing the end of the series itself there. I was not expecting him to get shot. Let's put it that way. At the point where he's having the battle, and this is the point in a classic Western where the hero overcomes all odds.
Yes.
And he should have finished by shooting the judge. Instead, the judge kills him. And it's, I mean, apart from the fact that there's not spewing blood or anything, it's pretty obviously a fatal wound.
Yes.
I think it's a head wound, and he's dead. That comes totally unexpected to me when I first watched this episode.
Likewise, I mean, that was a strong story element. That it didn't quite feel like an ending to me because,
somehow I always felt though that when I was watching it that somehow we would find out that this is the village. So I'm not surprised by it going back to the village at the end. I was expecting that throughout the entire story, but how it goes back to the village is it's not perfect. It's very rushed.
I mean, even the very fact that the town is suddenly we discover this town where he's had a pretty kind of free reign, a free ride, because he's obviously been off onto the surrounding hills on his horse, so he's covered a bit of ground. And we're supposed to believe that he can wander out, and in a few paces he can be back looking down on Port Merion, and not ever have noticed that from his previous life. However many days or weeks he's spent in Harmony, he's never noticed that the village is right next door.
And they won't shut up with their music.
The bloody band playing. Yeah, exactly. That to me, that was unnecessary. The kind of, hey, let's show that we're back in the village. Yeah, I will say I did kind of expect to see there being some link back to the village, but I'd rather they didn't bother than do something that was so obviously and unsatisfactorily contrived.
I wonder if another filmmaker might have, and I'm not saying this would be better, but I think when you have a story of this nature, and I've seen some other stories of this nature, I can't bring any to mind right off the top of my head, but where you're thrown off balance from the start of the episode. It's like, well, this isn't right. I mean, these are the actors I know, but this isn't the show that I know. Usually about a halfway mark, they give the audience some clue that something's going on. Like, suddenly you cut back to, you're watching number 6 on a screen, and there's a keyboard and a hand mysteriously types something in or something.
Yeah.
And then you go back to it and you realize, there's something bigger going on here. This is not, and I assume that's, strictly for the audience, but it spoils the reveal at the end. And I love the reveal, but as you say, the ending itself doesn't quite match up.
I mean, I think sticking something like that in would not have served this episode, and there is a difference between this episode and some of the things like the Doctor Who episode Inferno or Triangle in the X-Files. It's much more explicitly set up as this here's the scenario under which we're going to get this alternative reality. So all the time it's a bit clearer what's going on, whereas with this, boom, you're straight into it. I mean, as we've said, there's no title sequence, nothing like this. Instead, we were expecting the prisoner to come on, and now instead we're watching a Western. But it's good. It's a good story. It's an enjoyable episode. So to have those kind of plot-led inserts kind of breaking you out of it, taking you away from it, I don't think that would have been helpful to it.
It might have kept an audience that was iffy.
Maybe, but I kept watching it because I thought, well, this is good in itself. I want to see what's going to happen.
It's cowardice on the filmmaker's part. I mean, a lot of decisions that are made in television is cowardice on the filmmaker's part or the executive's part. Just like I'm sure, and I know we've discussed it, the order that they aired these episodes.
Yeah.
By putting quote unquote stronger episodes first, they are scared that the audience will leave. And so that they didn't do it here is a good thing, but there's a story behind that. I will add. But it didn't. But you still have to tie it back to the series somehow in the end. I think. I don't think that they could let it go all the way to conclusion and just go away and go, no tie to number 6, no tie to the village. I wouldn't have worn that with many series, but I could have accepted that with The Prisoner, just because of
the fact that we have been conditioned as an audience to accept we're not going to get all the answers. And in this, we just get fed a kind of bunch of convenient answers at the end. There's also the fact that this is basically, in terms of the answers, this is basically the same plot as A, B, and C.
Yes, it is. Yes, I meant to mention that. This is A, B, and C actually told a different way. Instead of showing us what they're doing, as they do in A, B, and C, we experience it in a more cohesive fashion. So. Or it's a narrative.
I mean, I like it better. It works for me, but at the same time, as far as if you consider that question to be important, and you consider the question of how is this all possible? Why is number 6 here? To be deserving of an answer, to give an answer that is just basically recycling something you've used before. Doesn't seem to be according it that much.
But another strength to A, B, and C, to me, to the approach taken in A, B, and C, is that because it's broken up, we get to watch the prisoner win. And in this episode, he doesn't. I mean, not only does he not win against the judge, ultimately in the end, there's no evolution of his tactic. He doesn't improve his game throughout the story. He isn't making any progress against the nefarious plan that the village has, the drugs or he's not mentally overcoming the illusion or anything like that. He is absolutely, utterly a passive,
but he's not absolutely passive. I mean, I take your point. He doesn't overcome. He doesn't prevail. But the prisoner doesn't always prevail. After all, he always ends up a prisoner.
Right.
And in this, where he is successful is he
beats number 2 in most episodes. And in this episode, he doesn't. Number 2 beats himself.
Yes. Okay. So number 2 isn't successful, and number 6 it's another stalemate episode. We've had one or two of those before, and I suppose there is a sense in which that is not entirely satisfying. It doesn't give us a hero at any rate. But what it does do is it does give the prisoner an opportunity to make the choices all the way through. If it's about autonomy, he is always making that decision of will he or won't he take up the badge, and on whose terms will it be? Will he or won't he pick up a weapon, and on whose terms will it be? The fact that he ends up dead on a saloon floor is as a result of the decisions that he's taken. It could have been different. He could have conformed. He could have taken the badge sooner. He could have put his weapon down. He could have, in those 5 seconds, said, I will work for the judge. He didn't. Those were his choices. So in that sense, now here's the thing. And that's what it's about, because there you're set up with it. This other theme that's running through this one, this question of pacifism of it. You're always going to face an impossible position with that, because the pacifist is never going to win in a gunfight.
Well, now here's the thing. Because they set it in the Old West, and this may have to do with the European angle, as I was saying. It's not quite, apart from it being well done, it's not quite right when I look at that and saying, well, as a 1960s television Western episode. And I'm not saying anybody would necessarily do this even in an American 1960s Western television, but in this, I can't understand why, after a very short period of time in the town of Harmony, realizing, and it's very obvious that the judge is running everything, that when the judge is there in the jail and says, and he takes the badge, but he won't take the guns, frankly, he should have taken the guns and shot the judge dead. Story over. Because that's the way of the justice in the Old West. And it wasn't really like that, but that's the way it is in a television Western. And yeah, it would have been cold-blooded murder, but at the same time, that would have been the quickest way out of this town.
But that wouldn't be what number 6 would do. In a sense, that is itself to conform in a way, isn't it? Because what he's trying to do is avoid this kind of
I realize that, but by putting it in the setting of the village, there's a good reason why he doesn't kill number 2. 2 reasons. One, number 2 is a cipher. He is not the man in charge.
Yeah.
In Harmony, the judge is the man in charge. There appears to be nobody he's responding to. So there is a single point of failure in this system, and it's the judge. Yes, he's got his henchmen. Yes, they might come and kill you, but you will have done a greater good. And in the village, he has no weapons. He would have to, be able to strangle him, which I'm sure he could, but not as fast as the man hands you a loaded gun and you solve the problem. A little bloodthirsty, perhaps, but it doesn't quite
a little bit.
It doesn't quite match the civility level of it. It's a little high, and I realize that is the character of the moral character of the sheriff, and we never even find out if the sheriff resigned on moral grounds, like we think the prisoner did. We think he resigned because he didn't like something they were doing. From little hints that were given, we're not given that hint in this. And he could be he resigns because he's tired of shooting people. We don't know.
I mean, it could be. It would be. I mean, given how subtle the hints are in the story of the village, I think it would be a bit much to try and factor that into this. We do, I think, get quite a strong sense of the moral character of the sheriff, and that's what's important in terms of. How does he conduct himself? Does he conduct himself according to the law of the Old West? Or does he try to avoid all of that and to live life and behave, be on his own terms, behave in the way that he considers to be a moral way to conduct himself?
All right, so he takes the job of sheriff and he upholds the job scrupulously. First person you arrest is that crooked judge and put him in jail. Again, it's that whole, the notion of sheriff is a lawman, and, maybe he shouldn't shoot him, but he certainly could put him in jail.
But I guess we don't know why he resigned because we don't know where he worked before, but the sense I got from it, and I'm struggling a little bit to put my finger exactly on what it was that conveyed this, but the sense I got from it was really that he didn't want to work for the judge. He thought the whole setup was a corrupt setup, rather than that he didn't want to be a sheriff or a lawman at all. So I guess your point is yes, but he could get rid of the judge and
somehow, yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that is where the analogy breaks down, because the feeling was, and perhaps this is just carrying over a sense of what it's like in the village, and what we kind of gleaned about number 6 and his whole background from the show so far is a sense that he finds the whole system distasteful, and therefore he doesn't want to have anything to do with it. He doesn't necessarily want to tear it all down. He doesn't want anarchy. He doesn't want total destruction, but he does not want to have anything to do with it.
Yeah, that's anyway, one thing made me think, I said he didn't win. In a way, he does actually have a victory. It's a passive win, but it's a win. 4 people went into this system, and we are told through the immediate fallout of him getting shot and breaking out of the fantasy, we're told that number 8 had warned everyone that they might get caught up and drawn into the fantasy themselves, because they themselves are part of it, and that they will do what it is that they will do. The idea being that they're going to have, as he puts it, bring him to this fantasy town, give him love, take it away, he will break. And break there, he's broken anywhere, but they will all get caught up in this thing. It fails because number 2 precipitates the breakdown too quickly, and number 8 is very critical of that. But the fact is, that is indicative that number 2 broke under the fantasy first. And we later see that both number 8 and number 22 also basically break down. Number 22 is racked with grief for what she's done, even though she is, part of this scheme. And number 8 cracks up because he's now madly in love with the saloon girl. So in a way, number 6 stayed true to himself and did not crack, whereas the forces of the village. So like I said, it's a passive victory, but it is still a victory on his part. He is still the stronger person than they are.
I'm certainly willing to give him more credit for having held out and for having done things his way. And in doing that, he hasn't broken out of the illusion. He hasn't been able to see through the fantasy, but he comes out of it unscathed because he's done. You know, I don't quite know. You will do what you will do means. Does it mean that the character you're playing will take you over, or that your own natural impulses will surface in the new environment? I'm not quite sure what the implication of that statement is. But either way, Number 6 and the sheriff, you know, whichever he is, steer a kind of a pretty straight path, as Number 6 always does. And because of that, he comes out of it unscathed, where, as you say, the others, all to a greater or lesser degree, get sucked in and broken by it.
Also, after he breaks out of the illusion, did you notice that Number 6 never utters a word through the rest of the episode?
No, I didn't.
He's absolutely quiet. He storms into Number 2's office and he doesn't say anything. He looks and he sees, and then when he sees Number 22 looking guilty over there by the bicycle, he turns and walks out. He's wordlessly kind of wandering in the town later on when he hears her scream, and runs over and doesn't say anything as she dies in his arms. It's totally quiet. It's very, very interesting way of portraying. I think it's very effective. I think the use of not speaking was very effective in this episode. The original script, Kid talked all the time. He was. You know,
I can't imagine that working.
He said exactly what he said with his eyes. Basically, I mean, there is absolutely no problem in my mind, and I do think that the standout performance here is Alex Karras. That can't be right. The guy who plays the kid. I think he does a really good job in this episode as a nut, but he doesn't have to say a word, and I get everything that he's saying. And if you took the script and you looked at the words that they had written down there, you would go, yep, I got that. I totally got that from what he said. I'm going to do something nasty to you. I'm going to get you. Don't mess with my hat. You know, anything like that. He got it.
It's a fine line, I think, between over the top and convincing psychopath.
But I'm still, when I watch this episode, maybe because it's British, and it's a Western, and those are not two things that go together. Just like a spaghetti Western, it's not a Western. I expect it to be a bit of a caricature.
Yes.
And so he is a caricature.
Think that's why there is a need for that character to be very much exaggerated, larger than life, however you want to put it.
And so I thought, you know, I really thought he did a great job in it. So let's see. I get a few notes here from the script book, which has, you know, more fascinating trivia on the on the episode. The Living in Harmony was not the original title. Would you like to guess what the original title was?
A Town Called Mercy?
Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling.
Oh, well.
Which, of course, is
recycled that one then.
Line from the music from High Noon.
Yes, but there is an episode called Do Not Forsake Me, isn't there?
And this is why I get them all confused. And I don't think I knew this. But
Do Not Forsake Me doesn't seem to be a good title for the episode Do Not Forsake Me. I
agree. It is not a good...
understand that title.
It is not a good title for that, because every time I hear Do Not Forsake Me, I'm going to Western. I mean, that just their associations just take me right to Western. And so when I think I was listening to one of our old podcasts, and I was going, you know, which episode are we doing next? And you go, I think it's Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling. And, oh yes, that's an interesting episode. And I can tell from my tone of voice that I was thinking of this one at the time. And I was definitely thinking of this episode at the time. And then I look and I go, oh, it's that one. Okay, it's not. But on the other hand,
I'm not sure that Do Not Forsake Me would have been a particularly good title for this one either.
No, I think Living in Harmony is a better title.
Yes.
I think, you know, it's the metaphor for getting along and living in, you know, get into the village and be part of the community, and plus the town. And it's a great title. It's a much better title. But having had that Do Not Forsake Me in The Prisoner will always trip me up. Some stations around England when the title Living in Harmony comes up, overlaid The Prisoner on that screen or the next screen so that audiences wouldn't be confused. Patrick McGoohan was not happy with that. He didn't want them to. So our discussion about, the bulb, that was very much McGoohan's wishes that it be ambiguous throughout the thing. And I mentioned it was shot in Dunstable Downs. The studio lot where the town is at the MGM Borehamwood. Am I pronouncing that right? Borehamwood?
Could be.
Somewhere in Britain. It's one of those multi-syllable names. All words I know, bore, ham, and wood. But put them together and,
No, that seems a good way of combining them.
Until you get to Leicestershire and you hear people pronounce that, and you go, why do they mispronounce that all the time? Anyway.
Well, I think that's bad. Try reading Loughborough.
Do I want to know how that's spelled?
Lugabaruga.
Is that Wales? That's Welsh, though, surely.
No.
No?
It's English.
Okay. They don't have a county cricket squad, though, so I haven't heard that name before. Some stuff that was... that MGM Bournemouth, you will also see it in UFO. It's the studio lot that they use for Straker's film studio.
His top secret.
His top secret film studio. In one episode, he's there with his son, one of the earlier episodes, showing him they're having fun on the studio lot, and they're in that set. And
the Living in Harmony set?
Yeah.
Oh.
And in a later episode...
Prisoner is what, 67, right?
Yeah, about that.
Were UFOs 69?
Yeah.
So it was the set was still there.
Oh. I think it's a standing set, just they redress it for different purposes, but it's pretty obviously the same little town with the tree in the middle, and they also use it in another episode of UFO, which we haven't reviewed, that involves Mexican bandits. So,
I can't wait.
Spoiler there are Mexican bandits coming up in the show.
I hope they're as good as the Mexican bandit in this one.
I think it's the same guy. Cut and not cut things from the story. The judge is always winning at solitaire. Did you notice that?
I didn't spot that.
He always finishes those hands off and he wins. So
is that solitaire in American?
I think it's called Patience over there, right?
A particular game of Patience called Sevens.
Okay, I couldn't tell which game it was, but it's pretty clear he's finishing it off with the last ace and winning the couple times we see it come out. So is that supposed to tell us, from what we see, is that supposed to tell us that everything's rigged?
Yeah.
Much like The Village?
I would say so. Pretty difficult to win every time.
But the cut version, there's also a lot of poker. And in that, he's playing the townsfolk, and he's beating them every hand all the time. And finally, we get towards the end of the episode, and we not even realize, the sheriff calls him out on it. He's cheating. And they're too afraid to call him on it. It's basically, they're just giving him their money through losing at poker. They'll be holding, 4 kings, and he'll have nothing, and they'll go, nope, you got me beat, and lay down the cards and give him their money. So there's more of that in the cutout stuff. I think that was fine. I think having it more subtle with just winning at the game is, you could miss it. In fact, I'm sure I missed it on my first few viewings. I just kind of noticed it this time through when I was looking at it and going, hey, he won a game earlier. He's only played 2 games and he's won both of them. That's pretty good odds. So, they did have some trouble with censors on this episode because of the violence. Because
I see. Yes.
Yeah, that kind of censors, not
that
not
was
Star Trek censors. Yeah.
No.
The censors, the hanging in particular, not allowed until after 9 p.m. Watershed in the UK.
Yes, and of course they didn't show you very much there.
And that was cut down from that, but even then the episode got pulled and shown like after 10 o'clock in many places because of it. Plus the fights were cut in many places because they were too violent. It's quite a violent episode. Like I say, in the United States, apparently they said it was the drug use that is why they didn't show this episode.
drug use.
I didn't notice any drug use in it, but it was really the guns. It was the whole anti-gun thing. They didn't like that one. Colt 45 is an American company. Couldn't have any of that pacifist nonsense going on there. Every man carrying a gun. 2 of them. It's like, for the record, I am not wearing 6 guns at this moment. There's several lines in the episode that are cut where people are kind of saying to the judge, he'll never come around. And the judge responds with things like, you did. Things like that. So that to indicate that everyone in this town has been through this process, including Kathy. I think when he gets the first drink and she says, first one for regulars is free. And he goes, I'm not a regular. And she says, neither was I. And so, I think good cuts. I think good cuts. But obviously, when they wrote this story up, they had a lot. I think, actually, there's probably more cut out of this episode than any of the other scripts that I can think of, except maybe Many Happy Returns, which were cut and then replaced. This one seems to be cut. I have a sneaky suspicion that this was probably would have been way too long. They probably had a lot they wanted to do and just couldn't do it, and they went with the more subtle approach, and which has worked in the past. It's more obvious that the judge is just really, and the kid are rotten. Like after Kathy's brother is killed, they all go back to the saloon. The judge orders whiskey, and he specifically says, Kathy, bring me a whiskey. And Kathy, who is looking at him murderously, has one of the other saloon girls take it over. And she brings it over and puts it down in front of the judge and said, nah, I said, Kathy, bring me that drink. Take it back. And she takes it back, and then Kathy has to come over and bring him the drink and serve him. And then he says to everybody, hey, everybody, Kathy's going to sing us a song. And she has to get up and sing while crying. Nice, man. So, yeah, the judge is very clearly a really nasty guy. And maybe that would have fit better with the idea of you will lose yourself in the part and you will do what you would have done. Showing that number 2 is a more sadistic character than...
But number 2 hasn't... obviously number 2 is different, number 2 each week, but...
But don't you think all of those people are in a situation where they are in control and they are, for the most part, they're working to a plan? And I think the idea is that you lose yourself in the fantasy. I'm no longer running a game against number 6. I am the judge. And those personality traits that you might have that you suppress, such as being a sadistic, like I probably would have shot him. I mean, I would not shoot a person in like that in real life. That would not be what I would naturally do. But, if I were in that fantasy world of an Old West, I might have. That crossed my mind. That would not be something I would do under control, but in a fantasy world, I might. And
it doesn't seem to me that sadism is necessarily an aspect of the number 2s that we've seen. Not just that then they're keeping it in check, but they don't actually have to be sadistic. And the control thing, absolutely, that's what it's all about. But they have such power and such real power in those positions, and I think the judge seemed more powerful because they don't have to flaunt it. If you see what I mean,
yeah.
If you're kind of your own sadistic tendencies are something that are in control of you, that makes you less of a powerful figure in a sense. That you have to demonstrate those things shows your weakness in a way that I think the much more, again, subtle but more controlled performance we get from the judge in this works better.
I think
makes him feel more of a number 2.
I think the subtle, more controlled approach does work better for the Harmony storyline. I'm just suggesting that perhaps when you come out of it in that unsatisfying ending, that you might have been able to show that because he is behaving like number 2 in
he
Harmony.
is.
But then when we come out, he said, well, if you hadn't rushed it, if you hadn't precipitated this too soon, you have to try to take out of that statement that he just got so caught up in what was going on that he lost the plot. And he doesn't show that at any point during the course of the Harmony. He doesn't look like he's lost control or lost the plot. But if he had been a little more nastier, maybe it would have felt when you go, oh yeah, okay, I can kind of see that.
It's not a loss of control. It's not
self-control, not control of the town, but
it's pursuing his object too impatiently. He's not indulging his own sadism. He is trying to break the prisoner, and he does get too caught up in it because he's trying to push it too fast. But to me, that doesn't seem like a total loss of control. It's a bit of a loss of control. But I guess it's not acting completely out of character. It's not even, acting. It's still pursuing the kind of purpose for which the whole setup, the whole scenario has been established for. He's just not any longer doing it in as calm and, if you like, I suppose, a rational way, because I suppose it's a heat of the moment thing.
I just don't feel like anything ever precipitated. Number 8 saying, you rushed it, you ran it too soon. Like, at no point did I feel like he was rushing in the story. I guess that's really it. I doesn't feel like he did anything too soon. And that could just be the storytelling or the direction, or because there's no crack in anybody's armor except the kid, and he was nuts to begin with. So you can't, really, I blame him. He's the one that did what he wasn't supposed to do.
But that is fair enough, I think, because we're not supposed to take what number 8 says to number 2 at face value. What we've got there is a kind of buck passing situation. The problem is number 6 is stronger than either of them were ready to contend with. And so they could each criticize one another for that. And I think you could legitimately say yes. But, in view of the fact that number 6 is a much tougher nut than they realized, number 2 should have taken it more slowly. He should have played it a little more casually, taken the longer view. There are those criticisms that you can make, but it's not like he completely lost his head and went off on one, because he didn't. And like you say, you could say number 8 was more culpable in that respect and is therefore wanting to shift the blame.
Perhaps.
And that, even that line in itself wasn't so much of a problem. The issue I then have is that both number 22 and number 8 have this thing of kind of regressing back into the characters or whatever. And it's as if that line about being taken over is just a feed for that, so that they have got some kind of neat way of wrapping up the story, which I don't buy. But the idea that number 2, the judge is behaving in a way that number 2 would behave, it's that I like that. I wouldn't want to kind of see that lost.
Let's see, just a couple other things. More cut stuff. There's repeated references to him getting out of town. Like Kathy tells him, you got to get out of town and go get the real law and come here and clean this town up. So there's a sense that something should be done about the town, not just get out. Which, consistent with what number 6 wants to do to the village. He wants to come back and wipe them out. But there is, I think by leaving it out, again, you're more with that kind of frontier, just get away and leave the little isolated town to what it does. There was some little bit more in the story about him and Kathy having a little bit of a romance. Nothing major, but
I did wonder about that, because that aspect of it, and apart from that line you mentioned at the end, give him love and take it away, that doesn't come across at all. No.
There's like a line where she comes in and she's, after he's been beat up, and I'm really sorry about that, and then she blushes and says, oh, I'm blushing. And the sheriff says, well, you should do it more often. It looks very good, kind of thing. It's just really hokey stuff. And then she's not embarrassed anymore, and they share like a glance, and that's about all there is. But Like, it's more than you're going to get out of Patrick McGoohan, apparently.
Yes. You get a sense that he feels a responsibility towards her, maybe even some friendship.
Yes.
But certainly no indication of anything more than that.
No. And then the shootout with Kid and the guy in the bar. In the script, the guy pulls a gun, misses, or doesn't shoot. Kid draws, shoots the guy in the leg. Guy falls down on the floor. Then Kid kills him, which is not what happens in the story. In the story, he just shoots him and the guy dies. Or in the actual episode, I should say. That makes more sense of the line when the sheriff comes in and they go, "Cowboy shot first, wasn't Kid." Because, the code of the Old West, the guy who draws first, you can't be charged for murder if you're not the guy who draws first. Because it's self-defense. Or at least that's the code.
He does draw first.
He does draw first, that's right. And if Kid shot him in the leg, then that's all he needed to do. The second shot is murder. But he doesn't do that in the aired episode. So, and in that weird sort of protective town, I can see a bystander saying, "Oh yeah, the cowboy shot first, it's not murder," when everyone there knows that it was, because he shot him after that. So I think that would have been I would have liked it to have gone that way, but it's probably even more too violent. They probably would have cut that out for being gratuitously killing. But, it's clear that it was murder. There's even the code of the Old West, it's clear.
I quite like the way it is, because it's clear enough in that he provokes the standoff, and it's clear, it's clearly going to be unequal. It's clearly his opponent is reluctant.
Oh yeah.
And he forces him to draw, and then he kills him. So technically, it might be that he, I'm sure they could have hung him.
Yeah.
And I think that in a way that's better, because you get that voice saying, well, he drew first. It was a legal killing. But you also get the representation saying that, you've got to do something about this, because it is basically murder. And it doesn't seem to me they need more than that. The kid provokes him, so it's deliberate.
So after the guy comes to the sheriff and says, you stood up to the judge, and there's a bunch of us that would like to help, but we can't do it without you. And then that guy gets killed. Cut is before he finds that guy dead. We see the sheriff walking around town with a deputy's badge in his hand, trying to get somebody to take the badge, and he can't. Nobody will. They'll look at it and go, no, not gonna do that. So it's a little more hopelessness with regards to deputizing and getting the people to stand up behind him. And then the other thing is, I guess when McGoohan was shooting Ice Station Zebra, he sent a telegram to the guy playing the kid, and he said, I'm taking lessons from, I think it was Sammy Davis and Dean Martin on gun fast draw. So you better not disappoint. So the actor who was playing the kid went out and got a Colt 45. I don't know if it's a real one or a fake one. I'm guessing it was a fake one. And took lessons so he could learn to shoot. And according to the film editor, he won 9 frames to 11 on that shootout. He pulled the gun in 9 frames. McGoohan pulled the gun in 11 frames on the film, the actual shooting of the day. So really the kid won. I think he's quite proud of that. I would be too. I shot McGoohan. It's just clever editing that makes it look like he won.
They're not clever enough to show any blood.
That is a problem. And where is that from? There is another story where there's a fast gun, and every time the guy shoots somebody, he says, "Fall down, you're dead." And then on the last one, when he's up against a hero, he says, "Fall down, you're dead." And then he keels over dead. And that's exactly what that reminds me of in that scene. But yes, it only works if you don't put a big bullet hole in the middle of his chest or his head or something. But there wasn't any bullet holes in anybody else either. I think that's partially sensor thing. Star Trek sensors, not that.
I'm sure it was. Yes, I'm sure it had an aspect of censorship to it. It's how you film around those limitations.
Yes, like you shoot from behind him.
Yes, you rather than filming the lack of bullet holes, you film so that you don't see whether or not there is a bullet hole.
You put the sheriff far enough away that you couldn't tell, and you put the kid foreground in half in front of the camera, and
yeah, you wouldn't know from a long shot. You wouldn't be able to see.
Right.
If you did a close-up, face, you wouldn't be able to see because it would be out of shot. If you shot it from the side, you wouldn't be able to see.
There you go.
What to do a kind of mid shot from the front is basically pointing out, his essential unperforatedness, and so that does rather distract from it. But there you go.
I like the scene, but because of that big lack of a gaping hole, it does kind of spoil it. Unless, the sheriff was shooting poison darts and we couldn't see it. But anyhow, well, I think that's it for this episode. Unless you have anything for it.
No, that's it from me.
So, any idea what's next?
Next episode is A Change of Mind, according to my
Change
iTunes.
of Mind. Ah, yes. You see, now, A Change of Mind is the one that I always think is Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling. Now, seriously, that's the other one that gets me. So if I'm looking through those episodes, I'll look at Change of Mind and I'll go, oh, that's the one where they put his brain in another guy's body. And Do Not Forsake Me, that's the one where he's in the Old West town. Every time. It's a little triangle of
Yes, it does make sense, but yes.
misnamed episodes.
It's misnamed dominoes.
All right, well, Simon, thank you for joining me.
A pleasure, as always.
And listeners, we hope you'll join us all again next time on Fusion Patrol. We hope you've enjoyed this retro episode of the Fusion Patrol podcast here at the Fusion Patrol Classics YouTube channel. For new episodes of our audio podcast every week and our entire back catalog, come visit us at fusionpatrol.com. Or subscribe in iTunes or most anywhere fine or even disreputable podcasts are found. You can also support our podcast at patreon.com/fusionpatrol.